Lauren. How are you today?
Good, Nat. How are you?
I'm all right. I always feel like I have to do like very grand introductions. I'm trying. That's all I could do. I could try my best.
Jingle together, a theme music jingle.
We really should. We should bring back the jingle. Julie used to say that all the time. And like, honestly, she was right. Jingles really, they got thrown out and they should come back. But I kind of have I don't have a jingle per se, but I have intro music that just played before this.
Okay, but we should have our own personalized one.
Okay, we're going to work on that. Let's add that to our to-do list. I'm going to add that as a stress level 9. So I don't feel like being creative today. But I am really, 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 really excited for you to meet today's guest and to listen to today's podcast specifically you.
For me?
For you. Okay, so we're talking to Courtney today. She's a mama of twins. She lives in the UK, which is fascinating because their whole maternity system
way different.
Please, we're all getting on a boat, going transatlantic. I will row us there. Anybody pregnant, we're going. We should not give birth in this country anymore. And for those of you that would like to come at Lauren and I saying that we have a great country when it comes to birthing parents, I don't know where you live, but feel free to text us your zip code because we got to move there because this is not a country to have babies in. Motherhood and the United States, really not a match made in heaven.
No, it's not.
And you would think, since Lady Liberty is a woman,
that women would be held up, especially a woman expecting a child.
No, we're not. Instead, they were like, here, hold this torch to light up our shores and hold this giant book with all our rules and regulations. Thanks.
Thanks. Insane.
So that is one part to the conversation that we're having today. The second part is going to appeal towards your lactation side of the world.
Oh, really?
So Courtney's babies were both born with a tongue tie.
Oh.
Okay. They had, if memory serves me, I'm pretty sure it does, they both had the revision. Okay. However, one revision didn't stay revised.
Oh, it connected?
Yes. Yeah. And so she basically had one baby that was able to latch, was able to feed like typical baby, and then one baby with the revision that was never able to latch.
Yes. Okay.
Did you read that article about tongue tie in the Times?
Yes.
What did you think about that?
I didn't love it because the one doctor they talk about is my guy. Too, and he did Abigail's. He's my guy. And I swear by him. I have not had one client that I've sent him to that has had bad results. He's amazing. He is amazing.
Okay, so let's fill in the two listeners that we have. So what happened was the New York Times wrote this article, and it was basically about tongue ties. And the whole topic around it was that it's not prescribed. Thank you. It's overdiagnosed. And then basically are doctors that are taking giving kickbacks to lactation people and pediatricians that are going to them.
Yeah.
And so there's like
kickbacks. I send people to him left and right.
Well, maybe you're missing out.
The problem is that he only takes cash or cards or whatever. He doesn't take insurance, but you walk out of there and he gives you a whole folder with all the paperwork to submit for reimbursement from your insurance company.
Yes, because he's not in network.
Yeah.
Just like me and you, right? Yeah. So like as lactation professionals, we will give you all the paperwork to submit. However, we're not in network. But here's the thing, right? The people who do tongue tie revisions are often pediatric dentists. That's who you usually go to. Some ENTs, maybe.
Yes, I was going to say also some ENTs.
But mostly it's pediatric dentists. Okay, now statistically, the odds of your babies having a tongue tie are the same odds as you having twins. That's the same statistic. So I will say where you see it, where you read that and was like, that is, I see it from this end. I could tell you on my side of the fence that there's a hospital in New York City where I would say the majority of my families that come out of that hospital are told by the in-house lactation person that their baby has to get evaluated for a tongue tie. So that article, I was like, nail on the friggin' head, because how is it possible? And Lauren, it was the same day I had my mom's nurse and my cousin both had babies on the same exact day, same exact hospital. Yes, I introduced them beforehand because they knew that they were probably going to be there. And they both had singletons. So how is it that both of those babies were told that they have a tongue tie?
I don't know.
So
it's questionable.
All right. So then things like that in my universe, right? So I would say on a weekly average, I have about 10 lactation clients per week, which is a lot. Okay. Yeah. Some of them, obviously, like my goal as a lactation person is I want to see them once. I want them to feel good about things. And odds are I don't want to see them again. Like I want them to get all the information. I'll text and follow up with you. But we're like one of the only jobs, and same thing with you as a doula. Like you want to do your job. You want to make sure that the parents know what they're doing, that they feel good about it, and then you're out.
Yep.
But when you have people that are putting a bug in a mom's ear about a possible tongue tie, that mom already is going to feel somewhat defeated. Because she's going to be like, I can never, overcome with any skill or latch position or whatever, because my baby's never going to be able to eat. So I get really, really aggravated because when that in-house lactation person told that mom things, it puts me in a crappy position because now I lost 6 or 7 days of a mom like doing what she should have been doing. Mm-hmm. So that's why when I read it, I was so irritated. And I would say with the time that I have been like doing like hardcore lactation, right? So in a Manhattan pediatric practice, for those of you who are in New York City, I am at Pediatric Associates of New York on 34th Street in Midtown every Wednesday. You can come and see me. I'm on the 9th floor. But being there, I've seen kids that have had tongue ties. However, they're not always a problem, right? Because if you do a weighted feed and you see that the baby is getting plenty of milk and the mom has no discomfort and like everything is working out, yes, there could be a tongue tie, but there are different degrees to a tongue tie. And I get really frustrated when people come to me and say, my baby has a tongue tie. First of all, I'm like, I don't even know why you're here then. You should have went to an ENT or whatever. But when you work with lactation clients, has anybody so far said, I think this is it?
Usually no. Usually someone has to tell them first. And I've only had one client out of all my doula clients who the hospital said, this baby has a tongue tie. And they literally sent her from the hospital straight to get it revised. She didn't even go home. She went straight and got it revised and then went home. And I met her at home right afterwards. I was like, this has never happened before.
Yeah.
And this was her second baby. And the first baby was born right when the pandemic hit. And she thinks that the first baby also had a tongue tie, but she just suffered through it. She had a lot of pain, a lot of issues. And the one thing she did say was, I wish I had support back when everything was shut down, because I think my breastfeeding journey with my first one would have been better.
Yes. So it goes from class 1 to class 4. And I guess if you have a class 4, that's so delicious that they just saw that. Yeah. But it's the only time that I think too much information is bad.
I think a lot of the hospitals here on Long Island, they underdiagnose it. And then mom goes home. And the only reason that then they come searching for help from me or from other lactation counselors is because that's why the red flags are going up and why people are running to these doctors, because they are having problems. They're not just going, like in my experience, they're not just like, I'm not walking into someone's house and say, I think you got to go to Dr. Siegel and get it checked out. Like that.
But apparently, Lauren, there are lactation people that are doing that.
Well, that's wrong, obviously. But I think, like, I can't diagnose a tongue tie.
No, we can't. We have literally, we have no role in that.
I may say to them, you need to speak with a lot of pediatricians too underdiagnose it. They're like, no, it's not. And then the problems just continue. And then by the time I say to them, well, maybe you should see ENT or the pediatric dentist, and they go and it's fixed, so many weeks have gone by.
Yeah.
Because a lot of pediatricians absolutely do not know what
they don't. But the practice that I'm in the city, I think we're good, but we see such a crazy volume of patients that like you have no choice, right? You have to know things. And so for those of you out there too, if you are currently expecting and you're looking for a pediatric practice, try to find a pediatric practice that does have an in-house lactation person, because what I love is if I see something, I could immediately send them downstairs. And just be like, and I will call downstairs and be like, get ready. I'm sending down, Rebecca immediately. Could you guys just squeeze her in? So I love that.
Yeah. Whereas like out here, it's like, oh, you call, maybe you'll get in within a week, maybe. If you can get in tomorrow. It depends on the scheduling.
Well, what's so cool is in the UK, right? So with Courtney, I believe she delivered during the pandemic. And they just automatically come to your house.
Yeah.
Like in the UK, you just have
an automatic.
Oh my God, you got to hear her story. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, guys, here's Courtney. Hi, Courtney. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to get into today's topic. And I feel I'm watching my words carefully because I feel like it's a constant tongue twister. Even when I was talking to you before, I don't realize how many times I say the letter T. But today we're talking about tongue tie and how it affected you and your family. And I really know that here in the US, I don't know if you're familiar with the article that was just released a few weeks ago in the New York Times.
I saw it,
was talking about the trend of tongue tie. Now, I'm not taking a side either way on tongue tie, because I do genuinely believe that there are a lot of undiagnosed kiddos out there that do have a tongue tie. However, I will say, and this is where they're going to come at me, Courtney, with the pitchforks and the torches. I truly believe that a quick diagnosis for any lactation consultant is they have a tongue tie, you need to take it up the ladder. And to me, it's a very lazy way of dealing with a client. And I have noticed here, working in Manhattan, which, we're a pretty big city-ish, right? Like there's songs about us and stuff, but it's almost 100% of families from one particular hospital get discharged saying that it's a possible lip or tongue tie, which I'm like, something's onto that. So I feel, so in the article, it was basically talking about how lactation consultants are referring people to pediatric dentists, and they are getting a little kickback from those pediatric dentists. And there are definitely degrees of tongue tie, and some degrees of tongue tie can be worked out. And it's just, they got a brand new mouth. It's like wearing a new pair of shoes. Some of them can be worked out on its own, but of course there's some that will require some sort of intervention. And that's kind of, the article was like, does everybody require intervention? So it's been like a big to do. So I want to know about your story, and I'm going to ask you questions too. I'm going to pretend that I'm just an average Joe. I'm an average Jill, just minding my own business. So give us a little bit of story about your pregnancy and when you even first heard the words tongue tie and what you did about it.
Sure. So I was pregnant during COVID times. So through 2020 and gave birth in early 2021. So as you can imagine, I had a lot of time while pregnant to be online. And that was sort of where I was getting all my information, because there was no, in-person prenatal course to go to. Everything was online. So I don't know whereabouts sort of in that journey where I was researching, found out it was twins at about 8 or 9 weeks. And obviously had a lot of feelings and sort of emotions to process about that, but sort of immediately started researching things like feeding. How was this all going to work? And I'm sure it came up sort of somewhere in there. I know it was a topic on, some of the sort of Insta bloggers I follow where their children had been diagnosed and they were sort of going through their journey. So I was aware of it, but I wouldn't say it was something I sort of knew one way or another how I felt about it or what I would do in that situation. I sort of had other things on my mind. But when I certainly felt like I was familiar with the, potential signs that it could be a tongue tie. So when we were in the hospital, I gave birth, I was induced at 37 weeks. It was a 50-hour labor. So they came at 37 plus 2, but they were quite small. Jaundiced, had low blood sugar. So we were in the hospital for about a week. And in that time, one of them had, neither of them were in NICU, but one of them had like a feeding problem. So she was vomiting at every feed, and they didn't know what that was. And so we had to be tested, ruled out all sorts of scary, scary things. It turned out that it was a cow's milk protein allergy, and she was reacting to the formula top-ups that she was getting at every feed because of the jaundice and the low blood sugar. Which I had said, and I guess my moral of the story around the tongue tie, whatever it is trust your mom gut. Sorry, I'm in the UK, so my lingo might.
It's all right.
Trust your mom gut, because I said it. It was sort of the first thing I said is could it be a dairy allergy? And they were like, wanted to test for all these horrifying, scary things first. And then they called the dietitian who diagnosed it, and we were able to go home. But anyway, through all of this, she particularly was struggling with breastfeeding and latching, and sort of that kind of got swept under the rug because we were dealing with all of this scary stuff and the vomiting and she did sort of latch, and she was starting to feed a bit better towards the end of the week. So we sort of weren't worrying about that, but I had asked the nurses or the midwives in the hospital, because this was in London, so at King's College Hospital in London. So it's all midwives rather than nurses on the units, and they said, oh no, the latch is fine, everything looks good, there's no ties. And then I was finding feeding both of them extremely painful, and to the point where I was sort of, not to scare anyone, but like crying before every breastfeed, which is 8 times a day. So it was pretty difficult. And eventually, once home, got a lactation consultant to come and see me, because the NHS does offer that support for free. But at the time, because of COVID, it was all online. So it was only video. And I really felt I needed somebody, particularly with twins, supporting both heads. They were really small. I needed somebody there with me to like adjust and help me learn how to do it. So I had someone come to the home. So I guess the difference from what you were saying initially about sort of someone's interest or vested interest is actually she had the opposite interest, right? She could have charged me a lot more money to keep coming to my house and, helping me with the feeding. But instead she said, she continued to help me. She used the sessions with me, but she said, I really, there's a tongue tie here. They both have one. One is more prominent than the other. But I think you should get a tongue tie specialist in to review. She referred me in to the NHS clinic, but that was going to be a really long wait. So we decided, because I was at the point of giving up breastfeeding because of the pain. We decided to get a specialist in. So this was around 4 weeks. And so she came twice. So she came first to diagnose it, and then came again to check it and do the release for us in the home. And in that whole process, I felt like we were given a lot of information about exactly what you were saying. So the pros and cons of releasing it. What does the evidence say? The risks in terms of, infection or ties reattaching, what that can mean. And at that point, like any informed decision you make in healthcare, you have to weigh that up. You don't know what that outcome is going to be, and you make the best decision you can. And at that point, we decided we felt like the potential benefits, although they weren't guaranteed, outweighed the risks for us. And so we decided to release both ties. And for one of my daughters, that was absolutely the best decision. So she moved from having sort of combination feeding, which we had been released from the hospital on a very strict feeding plan. And I had been struggling to sort of build up the breastfeeding. She moved to exclusively breastfeeding, and about 6 weeks later, just stopped taking the bottle altogether, which I never got her to do again, despite many attempts, every kind of bottle you could imagine. And yeah, so that was it. She was sort of on it, and the pain stopped for me, and it became a much more positive process. For my other daughter, less than a week after the release, it's hard to say, she just suddenly started to be really distressed whenever she tried to latch. And it seems like basically we had the lactation consultant come back, the tie had reattached, and she sort of lost she couldn't remember, or would have had to relearn how to latch. And at that point, it was causing so much distress for her and for me at the breast. And she was already taking a bottle because she was combination fed. And ultimately, and I think this is where, had she not been a twin, maybe I would have persevered and been able to sort of resume breastfeeding at some point, or at least sort of keep it going to some extent. But when you've got two crying babies that need you round the clock, sort of had to let that go. And it's actually a little emotional talking about it, because the amount of pressure I was putting on myself at the time, and I think it came from this belief I had that everything had to be the same in order to be fair, or the sense of like, to be a good parent to both of them, I had to, so the fact that one was getting all this breast milk, breast is best, and she was going to get all those lovely benefits, and the other one was not going to get that because I couldn't pump enough to fully feed her. So I was triple feeding through all of this, by the way. So I was pumping. They both had different formulas because of the cow's milk protein allergy. So we had two different formulas to prepare, and they were formula feeding round the clock. So it wasn't that we were doing a formula feed and a breastfeed at different times. It was 2 breastfeeds, 2 bottle feeds at every
feeding session.
Yeah. Then I had to fit pumping in. So you can imagine my sort of mental health by 5 weeks on, 6 weeks on was quite low. And I really, something had to give at that point. So moved to bottle feeding only for B, who was actually my twin B, but her name is Beatrice. And in the end, so I can look back now, they're nearly 3. It was absolutely the best decision for the whole family. And I do not regret it at all. Releasing the tie, the loss of the breastfeeding, because what ended up happening is my husband and B developed this really strong bond, because he became her person. And we were able to sort of split the nights, which for a period of time, particularly after the 3-month regression, was a lifesaver for us, because both of us waking up every time a baby woke up was becoming so unsustainable. So Evie was breastfeeding. She co-slept with me from about 3 to 6.5 months, because it was like constant, and that was the only way I was going to get any sleep. And B was she slept quite a bit better. She was doing between 0 and 2 feeds in a night, pending. And so Chris was able to manage that, and it really built his confidence. And much later down the line, he took them away himself for a whole weekend when they were still babies, because he felt he could manage everything, whatever came up, he knew he could do it. So I think, particularly with twins, but I would say to any parent of a child with a tongue tie or feeding difficulties, whatever that is you just have to go with what's best for the whole family. at that point, and then, don't look back.
Amen. It's really true. And there's so many different things that could happen in your family and with, the whole procedure. It really has to be something you feel confident about, or you have to just close your eyes and jump. So because either we overthink it or we make a mistake and out of fear, don't act. So I'm really happy for you that you were like, okay. And you really went with it and you went with your gut. Now with B's tongue tie revising kind of itself or reattaching itself, does the pediatrician ever say like, we should reevaluate this down the line and maybe we should pay attention to this? Or is it just that it's really only important in that early feeding time and that's it?
Yeah. So at that point, when it reattached, we were then, at that point, the private tongue tie consultant wouldn't re-release it. So at that point, she said, if you want it released again, you need to go through the hospital clinic. And she referred us in. But then, it was a couple weeks, which in baby feeding time is like, and breastfeeding, certainly in terms of supply. And, that was like, that's it. And in order for them to release a tongue tie, their criteria was that at least 50% of that baby's intake via bottle or breast was breast milk. So that meant I had to be expressing enough for like 50% of her total ounces over 24 hours. And I couldn't. And again, this is a twin.
Yeah, of course.
Well, people struggle with supply with twins or without, but I think particularly because I had one twin who was fully feeding from the breast. So it was 100% of her intake was from the breast. And so then to have enough to then so it was like 150% of infant feeding. I just didn't have the supply for that. So we sort of looked at that and made the decision not to go for that hospital appointment because it just didn't seem like it was realistic for us. And I think, in another situation, or if she'd been the only one and I was able, then I probably would have gone for it. And then I would have taken the advice at that point and considered re-releasing or not. But no, I mean, there's nothing we've noticed. There's no speech delay. There's no difficulties with chewing, swallowing, and again, she's nearly 3. So I think if we were going to be concerned about any impact, we would be seeing it in terms of her speech or something like that. So no, but it had a huge impact on us in that, of course, in those weeks,
of course.
And it was a very, it was heartbreaking, really. It was really emotional, but then hindsight, you get the benefit of hindsight. If you were talking to me then, we might be having a very different conversation. But the intensity of the pressure in those early weeks and months, and I don't, we have a program in the UK called Health Visitors, sort of like nurse/midwives who used to come to your home.
Yes,
now you go to them. But they are, they're basically there to monitor the child's development. And my health visitor was telling me, you'll never be able to feed them yourself. She was, pushing the bottle and formula. She wanted me to fortify my breast milk. She felt they were too small. So I was getting a lot of pressure about their weight.
Wow.
I was threatened with going back into hospital one day after being released. So it was very intense because you're in such a vulnerable place and that you're experiencing this as people telling you you're harming your child or you're not looking after them. So the feeding stuff is so emotional and it's so, it like gets you.
Yeah.
So at the
There's
time,
so much attached to it. The thing is it really is true that this is how your babies are going to live. And then, you hear like your grandmother wasn't discussing formula and tongue ties, so that, historically that there has been great breastfeeding success. And so there is all this pressure. And then don't even talk about social media and all the glory stories that are on there, that I really wish that they would have filmed everything up until that wonderful story, right? Because when somebody has success, that's when they want to shout it from the rooftops. It's very rare that people shout their faults of what they feel as a fault, just like you did, but it's really not a fault. And there is a huge, huge learning curve when it comes to breastfeeding. But once upon a time, we lived in a village where your mom was next to you and your grandmother was down the hall. So we used to have all this unbelievable personal support of people that were trusted, that had been there and done that. And then just even leaving COVID on the side, we still don't live in a village. And so now you have people that are the lactation consultants or your health visitors. And whenever people call me, they call me and they feel very defeated. And I said, but you have to realize I have always existed. There has always been a me. There has always been a lactation consultant, childbirth person. There was always one of me in the village. And I said, and you just happened to find me through a doctor or a friend or whatever. But my breed of human has always existed. But now it's so much more challenging to find the me's and to find the people that are going to support you. But ultimately, a lactation consultant's job is, yes, of course, you have to make sure that your babies are going to be healthy and thrive, but it's also to support the mom and make sure that she knows that she's doing great, and also support her choices for whatever that is. So I think that's a challenge, though, to explain to somebody that my job isn't to tell you what to do. Yeah, I know you paid me to tell you what to do, but I can't. We have to figure out what's going to be best for you. So I'm sorry that you had all that thrown at you instantly. That's tough.
Yeah. And I think this is another thing where I always hesitate to be like, being a twin parent is so much harder, because I think everybody walks their own path and has different challenges, but there are different challenges that come with multiples, and those competing needs at the same time are one of them. And feeding is like the ultimate, I think, in some ways, because literally, if you're trying to breastfeed 2, let alone 3 or 4, that it's just, how is it going to work? And I think that's the thing. I was really lucky. My mom was able to get over here from the States. I think she tested for COVID about 17 times in 2 weeks. I mean, she had to quarantine. It was a saga, but she stayed with us for 3.5 months. And, thank goodness for that. And I try not to give advice to twin parents, but the one advice I would give to everyone is get help. Get help. And I don't just mean like an hour a week. Like you need more than that. And if it can't be family, or if you can't afford it, try to find friends, neighbors, ask people. But having her here and having my husband sometimes in those appointments with me, or just there telling me this child is thriving, do not worry, you're doing everything you can and more, so having your cheering squad to help with that sort of any negative feedback you might be getting from professionals, or to push back when you're in too vulnerable a place to do it. I'm a social worker, worked in hospitals, I'm very assertive, but I was not in that place emotionally, mentally, to be that sort of version of myself. And so I needed extra support. And my husband came to one appointment with the health visitor and just questioned her, just said, well, why do they need to be that weight? Where's the, what's the evidence base? And she had no answer.
That's never a good sign.
Yeah. So I don't want to be negative about all that. We got some amazing healthcare, and, we didn't have to pay any bill for our delivery or week-long hospital stay or all my scans, all of that was covered. So very, very lucky to have been over here for that part of the process. But every healthcare system has its has its
Faults.
challenges.
Yes. I think challenges is a nice word. One thing that we talk a lot in both, we do these twin boot camps and we teach our classes. And I always just really try to make sure that I imprint on families the acronym BRAIN. I don't know if you're as familiar with it, but if you spell it out, it's what are the benefits of this? What are the risks of this? What are the alternatives? What does my intuition say? And what if we do nothing? And so if you don't know the questions to ask, just use your brain, wink, wink, and just use that as the guide to ask those questions. And it doesn't even have to be something as challenging like a tongue tie, Courtney. Like it could be something super duper simple. But anytime you go to the doctor, it's okay to question. Nobody's going to get mad at you for questioning. And in fact, you may actually, I don't want to say like earn the respect of a doctor, but if a doctor really has to, or any healthcare professional has to really explain to themselves what they're doing, it puts them in check because they may have been giving the same advice all day long, for 10 hours a day. They're sitting there in a clinic and answering the same question. So it gets a little monotonous. So by asking what are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the alternatives? What is your intuition? And what if we do nothing? But this is like a prime example of that. And it's so interesting that you say you're a social worker because seriously, Courtney, the amount of families that we have that say that same thing. Like in my profession, I'm a CEO and have to deal with, these crazy people in the boardroom, or I do this. But when it's you're so fragile because, whether you had a vaginal or C-section delivery, that is a huge life change. And then physically, you're going through this crazy hormonal imbalance that's trying to right itself again. So there's so much going on. So no matter what you were in your quote unquote real world, that doesn't always translate into the parenting world. Plus, you also have fear, right? Because you have that whole fear, like if I don't do the right thing, am I going to kill these babies? And I know that's so crappy to say, but just putting it out there, just literally saying it, people are going to say, oh, you're crazy for thinking that. But if you really think that, you have to really get it out there and you have to say that so then people can help you. And so just talking about, the importance of having help is so critical. But I'm curious of how your mom dealt with the tongue tie diagnosis and what she was saying all along.
My mom is amazing. I'm sure she's going to listen to this. So I need to shout her out. She's just been the most wonderful cheerleader all along. And she's been very careful to never put, oh, well, this is what we did, so you should be doing it. So she's very, she's always shared her experiences and, what worked or didn't work for her. But she's very respectful of our, that things might be different or that we might make different choices. And so, tongue tie, as you said, was not a thing that she'd really heard of or experienced. It, wasn't on her radar, something to be concerned about. But when we were concerned and we sort of shared, and she was seeing the impact of it on me. So she was seeing how difficult the feeding was and how painful and, not to be TMI, but what my nipples looked like, she was seeing it all. And so she was very supportive of us taking action and trying. And she was very sort of sitting with us, listening to all the information, being just another sort of thinking person with maybe a little bit more sleep than we were getting, to take it in and help us make a decision. And I think reading that article, I thought some of the language I thought was a little bit intense around it being sort of like a traumatic procedure for children and sort of like this harmful thing. I mean, I witnessed it. It happened 2 feet from me in my living room. It was pretty instantaneous. There was very little blood. They went right on the breast and latched immediately afterwards. And there was no, nothing beyond that. The cries lasted for 30 seconds.
Yes. I think it depends on the type. I think the thing in the article that they were really talking about was the laser surgery. That it's like a little, it's not like, here, let me get this quick snip of a scissor. And to be even like more TMI, like old school midwives used to just use their nail to like sever the tie. And so like your mom wouldn't have even known Because if a nurse or doctor would have seen that, they would have just righted it and called it a day. Like that was it. So it wasn't as discussed as it is now, because there's so much compliance that everything has to go through, that parents really do need to know what's happening with their babies a lot more than in the 60s, 70s, even 80s. So it's fascinating that your mom I'm not saying it's fascinating. I'm happy that your mom was so supportive, because it really wasn't discussed as much. But truthfully, I'll tell you, like in the last 5 years, it's thrown around like wildfire.
Yes. And that's probably why I'd heard of it and why I had why that was in my mind to ask at the hospital when the initial challenges presented themselves. And so I think the same conversation that's being had now about sort of miscarriage and baby loss and how that was all taboo and no one spoke about it and you didn't know how frequent it was happening. And I think there's always the benefits of something being out in public discussion, in that there's awareness. And then there's also what that creates in terms of that fear or that sort of preconception that because it happens a lot, it will definitely happen to me. And, I had that fear about miscarriage, which is what led us to get an early scan, because of that prevalence in the discourse. And I think the same is probably true for tongue tie, but on the flip side, for me, that ended up being a really beneficial thing, that I had that awareness and knowledge. So, it's one of those where I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. It is. And so it's about, as you said, like equipping families with the knowledge of, how to interpret and make decisions based on information, rather than it being a linear, because this, then this.
Yep.
And I didn't feel in our experience that we were being pressured into making one decision or the other. I felt like we were given an array of options and the risks and consequences of everything, as you said, of doing nothing and and at that point, we felt like the potential benefits of being able to continue breastfeeding, in terms of their health and well-being and our goals for them were our priority, and we felt like we could manage the risks. And I think, looking back, even with what happened with Bee's tie, I still would have make the same decision, I think, because I don't think she was harmed ultimately. She's a happy, healthy, well-adjusted child. And I don't know what the opposite would have looked like, right? So I think comparing it against a perfect scenario is unrealistic, and it sort of puts unfair pressure on us. So, so that's our experience. But equally, I wouldn't go out there and say that everyone should make the same decision as us. I think you have to look at the circumstances that you're in and what your goals and your values are as a family, and the information that you have, and then make that decision for yourself.
I just get so stressed because working with so many pregnant people and pregnant people that may have had fertility issues, that sometimes if people don't have something to worry about, they don't know what to do with themselves. And so I am like, could we not worry about it until somebody tells you to worry? So I'm not saying don't do the homework. I'm not saying don't do any of that, but let's not make up a problem that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And, we don't have to read every medical research study on tongue tie right now if you're expecting. That is totally. Now, if you want to turn yourself into a tongue tie expert, go for it. I encourage it. But just because it exists doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. And I always fear that people who are already prone to anxiety are going to really slide down that rabbit hole into a whole world of, that one tongue tie out of 100,000 that didn't work. Like, if you need it, you need it. If you don't, you don't. That's it. The end of the story. We'll worry about it when we get there. Right now, it's not a problem. When it becomes a problem, we'll figure out what we're going to do. And I love that that's the way that you dealt with it. It was a passing thought in your pregnancy. It was kind of sat there in the back of your brain. And then when you needed it, you went to the professionals to say, what am I going to do next? And that's truthfully, that's the best takeaway you could give anybody, Courtney, is like, you say you don't want to, give advice, but the advice is don't worry until it's time to worry, and then get the advice from the people who are actually going to help you make the change, not help you spiral into an anxiety hole. Like that's my big problem with people giving like that diagnosis too or often, is then moms will already come to me defeated and have not breastfed for 2 days because they're like, oh, the person at the hospital said we might have this, so I'm not going to bother. And then it puts you back, because every hour with breastfeeding is critical if that's something, if that's your goal, right? So we don't want any time to pass. So for me, my big issue and why everybody went crazy with me is really because I was like, I don't know if it's overdiagnosed. I just know that it's not a worry until you need it to be a worry.
Well, I think also, that to me, not that I'm a breastfeeding expert, but what I learned in the process of breastfeeding was that that would be bad advice to stop feeding because there was some sort of, and as difficult as that advice was to follow, I got the advice that I should feed through it until we could get it further assessed and, potentially get an intervention. And, I did that. I'm sort of amazed looking back that I continued as long as I did, because they weren't released till 4.5 weeks. So it was over a month of just, and when you have one child, you switch back and forth. So one nipple is getting a rest. But I was, even if they weren't tandem feeding, which didn't work that well for me, just because they needed a lot of support to latch. But I was really trying because I really wanted to maximize that time. But when I wasn't, at every feeding, both nipples were getting used sort of double the time. So they weren't, getting that rest. So it was 2 tongue ties, 2 babies, same time. So it was all sort of intensified, right? And I think that's the sort of twin infant experience, right? It's like, it's not double, it's exponential.
Absolutely.
And so I think that like sometimes, and I think this is the issue in hospitals particularly, my experience was that the people who are skilled at sort of delivering babies, assessing and, supporting pregnancy, and the immediate post-birth, like feeding is not necessarily their forte. They don't necessarily have that sort of breadth and depth of knowledge. And they're not seeing the outcomes over time, right? Because they're seeing people in a very short period. And, I work in mental health, in social work. I've worked in inpatient units. So I've seen exactly the same thing. I think it's true across the medical profession. When you work in an acute setting and you see people sort of at a particular crisis point, or sort of at their lowest, or, you learn to think in a certain way.
Absolutely.
And when you work with people in the community, which is what I did over here, is community mental health, you work with people over the long haul. You have a very different view, a different lens that you're looking at any problem. And so you're going to give different sort of interventions and support. And so I think it's the same thing, whatever you're being told in the hospital, seek something outside of that, because
totally, Courtney, you have to. And do you know that the medical doctors here, I can't speak for your side of the woods, but medical doctors here have 0 lactation training. So I have, the practice that I work in is affiliated with a hospital, and I interestingly have a lot of doctor clients for both twins and lactation with singletons. And so I always say, like, you're a cardiologist, like, how do you not like I would have just assumed that since your body could make food, that it would have been covered a day in medical school, but apparently not. So I am I've even had a gastroenterologist that I'm like, there's so many benefits to like the microbiome and stuff of breastfeeding. Like, you would have thought it would have come up, but it's shocking to me that this whole, breastfeeding, lactation and whatever, it's just kind of left there on the side. And I don't know why. Like, I shouldn't be necessary. Like, honestly, Courtney, like nobody should find me. Like, I'm good. And that's the sign of a good lactation consultant.
Oh, I disagree. I think you should be. And I think actually it's such a negative myth that breastfeeding, we've been doing it for millennia. It's a natural thing, and therefore we should just know how to do it and we shouldn't need help. And I think that's a really like one of those damaging societal myths out there.
Agreed.
For new moms is like, I should just know how to do this and I don't, and therefore I'm failing in some essential way. So I think that was something that sort of national conversation did for me is when I was having trouble, I didn't go that route. I thought, I need help.
Yeah.
Where do I get it? And I hope that other moms, keep wanting to say mums. I hope other moms.
We have plenty of listeners from your area. So absolutely, we are very international.
I hope that other mums do that, that the first instinct isn't self-blame and critique. It's how do I get some help?
Mm-hmm.
And that is seen as a positive thing, because as you were saying before, we're not really meant to do this alone. We're meant to have that village. And that really looks different now. Like a lot of our village is virtual. For me, joining like a twin community here and following pages like yours and just sort of soaking up information here and there that felt helpful. And then, letting go of the ones that weren't. I followed some accounts that were really helpful for me during certain periods of sleep issues. And then my sleep issues would change as they do. And then that account was now making me feel kind of bad. So
yeah,
I unfollowed. And I think that's the thing. It's like letting go of the things that aren't serving you and seek help for something if you're needing it, whatever that might be. And whoever that might be from.
Yeah. It's very funny that you say that, because there is like when I have my business hat on, there is a lot of colleagues that I have that will tell me that I'm doing a bad job at business, because basically my goal is to have you not need me. That's my goal, whether it's in a virtual class, an in-person class, whether it's for like my goal is for you to feel so good and be really capable, and you feel capable and know that you're capable, that you only call me to just say, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Want to grab a glass of wine? Like, that's all I want. So that's my goal of Twiniversity, is to give you the information that you need, but not to keep you here forever, right? Because if we look at like business, people will say, oh, you should have more classes for the next thing, or you should have an article that links to this. I'm not saying I shouldn't. Maybe there's things that I should be doing, but ultimately I want you to just feel so good that you take the reins, not leave the reins in my hands. And you have to find those people within your network that are going to do that for you. And just like you said, to unfollow, that's such critical advice. Like if you're following an account or you're following a page or even seeing a doctor that's not making you feel like you are capable and giving you the tools that you need, instead of just saying, I'll fix it, just leave it to me, I got this. That's not working. That's not going to work. And even if they did that, let's say hypothetically, and Courtney, this may not be you, but what if you had another set of twins? If you gave the reins to somebody else and you didn't take the opportunity to learn everything that you could, you're going to be dependent on people again. Not saying that you shouldn't be, you should always ask for help, but I really want to make sure that parents feel capable and good, and that they got this, and that they know they're not alone. And yes, it's going to be hard. It is. There's nothing we could do about that. You could read twin stuff till the cows come home. That doesn't mean you're going to have an easy experience, but you're going to have the experience that's meant to happen. You're going to worry about things when it's time to worry about them. We're not going to pre-worry. We're not going to have pre-anxiety. We're just going to deal with it. And so I'm really proud of you that you took the road that was best for your family. And I'm so thankful that you're sharing your story and that you're allowing me to be like, here's what the scoop is on this side of the street. Everybody's going crazy. Everybody's doing laser surgery. And people are like, no, it's necessary. And I'm like, maybe not. Let's give it a day. Let's see what happens. Maybe we can pump. Let's use a nipple shield. Let's see what's in my toolbox as a professional before we resort to the next thing. Right? Like, let's not assume the baby doesn't know what's happening. So did you
nipple shields probably saved? Yeah, they probably saved my journey through those.
They saved your nipples.
That's a really good reminder. Yes,
they saved your nipples.
But I really would have given up. And I think that's the thing. At a certain point, I would have had to just say, I can't do this. And so again, I had a lot of fear about using nipple shields because if any mom group, any chat, whatever, they're all like, oh, it's going to ruin the latch. They're not going to know what to do. They'll only take that. They'll want the bottle. They won't. I don't know. I can't even remember all the nonsense, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, I used them, and my daughter, exclusively breastfed for 15 months. And so it absolutely does not have to be the end. I think it's just about taking that advice, learning from people who have that knowledge, and not panicking. And I think that's like that black and white thinking of, it's either this or it's that is just almost always, there's always something up with that. So, if that's where your mind is going, or that's the messaging you're getting, there's probably a gray that's being missed somewhere and needs to be looked at. So, just a lot of I can't even remember. It's so long ago now. How it all blurs together.
We have the benefit of living in a gray world because we have the two kids. And so we have to live in a gray world because one kid could be Black and one kid could be white. And so we might have to live in kind of this middle harmony that occurs. And I don't think singletons really understand that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to singleton people, by the way. I joke a lot about dismissing singletons, but how I feel about it is that singletons do have the privilege of having something one way, perhaps. Right? Really depending, of course, once again, but they only have to deal with one baby. They have 24 hours in a day to focus on that one baby. They have, 24 hours of experience with that one baby. We do not have that. We do not have that leisure to dedicate ourselves as much as somebody would with a singleton. And that doesn't make you a bad person. That just makes you a twin parent. That's all that it is.
And I think that, going back to what I was saying, like letting go of the idea that everything has to be equal. Like you have, mine aren't identical. Maybe could feel a bit differently if yours were, but I think generally they're two individuals, whether identical DNA or not, and they need two different things from their parents. And it's okay to be a different thing to each of them at the same time. You're not being unfair or having a favorite or, loving one more than the other. So when I let go of that and just accepted that I needed to learn to be the parent that each child needed, that also took a lot of pressure off. So I think, and I've seen my friends who've had one child and then, a couple of years later they have their second. They go through the same thing. Well, I did this for my first, and I did this for my first, and we didn't allow any sugar until this age, and they didn't have any screens, and they were exclusively breastfed. And now the second one comes, and all of a sudden they're coming into a different family, different environment. They're a different child, and they need different things, and things are going to look different for them, and that's okay. You're not, you didn't ruin one or the other. And I think, twin parents are going through it. It's just simultaneous.
Oh, it's crazy. It's insane. I can't even believe that this is our life sometimes. And this could be a whole other topic, but like that whole thing of being fair, not necessarily equal. And this was I don't know what I was either watching something or I was listening to something, but it was a brother and a sister, and they were raised by, they had the same parents, and they were raised at the same time. They weren't twins, but they were talking about basically how they felt that they had such different experiences. And they were like, but when dad did this, I felt this. And then the other sibling would be like, but I felt this. So it goes to show that you could do the same thing with two people, but the way that it's received from those people, it could be totally different. And you could have somebody who's a little bit harder, like a child who's harder on themselves, that may need a little bit more encouragement, where you could say, oh, I'm not as encouraging, or I'm not, there enough for the other one. The other one may be like, I don't care, go away, do your thing, I'm good. And you do have to keep pivoting just your parenting style, not only from infancy, but for infinity, until the end of our days, because we never stop being a parent. So even when the kids are big and in college and then they have their own families, that doesn't mean that you're less of a mom. Just like you were talking about your mom, that your mom knows how to speak to you to the way that you'll listen. Your mom may speak to a different sibling or a friend or a family member in a very different manner, but your mom knows that by staying neutral and just expressing her opinions, she knows as your mom, because she's a legendary mom, that that's the way that she connects with you. So it gives me chills to think about it, because we could say, well, I had two kids born on the same day and they're identical. And, I was the same mom to both and I did the same things for both. That doesn't mean that it was received the same by both. That's why I was like, oh my God, I just went off on a tangent. But it's so important to be the parent that kid needs. And your job is to really figure out what the heck that means. Because I'm still learning.
Yeah,
19 years later,
I'm definitely still learning. But I have found, and anecdotally, I've met a lot of twin parents. I've been involved in the local club and play group, and and WhatsApp chats, and pretty much everybody seems to find their kids are opposites. And I don't know how that happens. How much of it is genetics? How much of it is just, they sort of figure out how to be different, just mess with you. I don't know. But yeah. And literally it was from when they came out, my two, just have slept differently, fed differently. One had reflux, one didn't, one breastfed, one didn't. Sleeping was different. And now, now they're talking, walking, running, jumping, all that stuff. Very opposite personalities.
Yeah.
One has curly hair, one has straight hair. They're opposites. And so I'm just always having to play catch up and figure out, as you said, what does each one need from me at any given time? And that can be some really tricky moments when they need something at the same time, which I can't give to them both. And then you have to make choices. And
I feel for you. I really do. And nobody understands me when I say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. I'm not saying that infancy is easy. I'm not saying that the whole challenge of the tongue tie isn't easy. It just evolves into just a whole new slew of problems. And then once they realize that they have free will, this is the worst day of any parent's life. You could get out of bed on your own. I'm
about to do it. I'm about to do the bed from crib transition. So talk about worrying about something before you need to worry. So I am having a lot of anxiety about it. And I keep having to say exactly what you're saying. It might be fine.
Yes.
I thought losing we called it a binky dummy, pacifier, whatever. I thought losing that was going to be horribly traumatic. By the way, one used it, one didn't. It was one night. It was fine. It was nothing. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is going to be like that.
You lost sleep over something that wasn't an issue.
Right. And maybe it's going to be horrendous.
No, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine until it's not. That's got to be the way that you go into all parenting. It's fine until it's not. And you hope for the best. And you just have a million tools at the ready for if things go a little off the rails. But you got this. And so we're going to say goodbye for this podcast now, but you're going to stay there. I'm going to talk to you about sleep and make sure that you're okay with this. But really, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for playing with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And guys out there in podcast land, YouTubeville, wherever the heck you're watching this, just know if you have any questions for myself or for Courtney, you could slide into our DMs or inbox at community@twiniversity.com, or we're literally just Twiniversity on every social platform. We were doing branding before I even knew there was a word called branding, but my word Twiniversity didn't exist. That wasn't a word, but now ALEXA knows that word, and I'm so excited. I created a word, guys. So yeah, you could find us so easily. We're not Twin University. We're not, Twiniversity. We're just Twiniversity. Find us. And if you need anything, remember that our monthly meetings is always the second Tuesday of the month. Just show up if you'd like. You could find the information on our website, but at second Tuesday at 1:30, without fail, we have a group meeting with twin parents from around the world that could just bring their problems and just vent to each other. And more importantly, have some people that have little experience under their belt, like myself and my team member, Lauren. So if you need us, you know where to find us. And until next time, alligators, thanks for listening.